She wanted to remain absolutely anonymous. That's why in telling her story, the researcher G.L. Davies simply chose to call her Susan. I can say that in over 40 years of studying UFO abduction phenomena, her experience is easily the most horrifying that I've ever read. Susan told her story over many sessions without hypnotic regression and for only one stated purpose: to warn the world about what is really going on. And after telling her story in great detail, she chose to vanish into obscurity. The horror that she experienced fits exactly with thousands of other abduction reports, but takes us to an unprecedented depth. Much of it is so explicit that I cannot share it on this video, but I'm going to excerpt it because it brings cold reality into a world that is addicted to lies. Welcome to Patterns of Supernatural Phenomena. Susan's experience is recorded in a short book entitled Harvest, The True Story of Alien Abduction by G.L. Davies, published in 2020. The long nightmare of Susan's life began when she was in her early 20s. At the time, she was living in a small town in Wales while attending a local college. Everything was average and uneventful, and she looked forward with enthusiasm to graduation and a career. Then one day, she and 3 college girlfriends decided to spend the night at the charming old farmhouse home of one of the girls whose parents were away. It was there that all of it started. The evening was peaceful and happy. Pajamas, laughter, music, and a movie. Susan had visited there before. The family had a boxer dog named Lenny who loved her, and she loved him. Everything was so pleasant. But then came the first moment of strangeness. Susan was upstairs in the restroom when she looked out the window. There were lights coming down the road toward the house, but this was far off the highway and no one was expected. The lights stopped moving and then went out. Instantly, the bathroom light went out and it was pitch black. No light was coming from the hall under the door. Obviously, the whole house had lost power. Susan heard the girls shouting and Lenny barking. Above her was a skylight. Suddenly, a fierce beam engulfed her. Was it a police helicopter? But there was no sound. Instantly, it vanished, and she was in darkness again. Then the power came back on. Rejoining the group, Susan asked if they had seen the lights on the road or the one above the building. No one had. What about the loss of electricity? Well, they were in the country and that happened occasionally. So she put it all out of her mind. Probably it was a driver who'd gotten lost on the road and had turned back, and it must have been a helicopter. In this lovely farmhouse with friends, what could go wrong? The family had a barn that had been converted into a garage with a delightful guest apartment on the second floor, which they often rented out to travelers. Susan loved it and asked if she could sleep there that night, suggesting that Lenny could go with her as her guard dog. That was really a joke. After the long evening of fun, she and Lenny crossed the yard and went up to the room. It was 2:15 a.m. when she turned off the light and lay in the dark. Lenny went to sleep on the bed beside her. What a nice evening it had been. Susan was so relaxed that soon she fell asleep. But at exactly 3:16 a.m., she awoke with a start. Looking back, the time on the clock by the bed would stay with her forever. Someone was in the room. Terrified, Susan stared into the darkness. A silhouette was standing at the end of the bed. It was small and slender, maybe 3 feet tall, like a child. And it was just staring at her. Panicking, she was about to sit up when the room exploded with fierce white light. It was the same light that she had seen before. Lenny barked and leaped off the bed. Instantly, the light vanished. In the pitch blackness, something crashed. Lenny was growling viciously. More crashes. Things were being knocked over. The light had blinded her. Then there was a blue flash, and for a split second she could see. The dog was attacking a tall black figure. Another blue flash, and an eardrum-splitting tone. With it came a howl of pain and an inhuman shriek. Lenny was lying silent on the floor. And then the dog was gone. Instantly, a black, featureless face appeared inches from her own. She screamed, and everything went dark. Susan awoke in a panic. It was morning. The clock read 7:44 a.m. Jumping up, she looked around. The room was a mess, and Lenny was gone. That was the start of everything, including the loss of friendship. The family blamed her for Lenny's disappearance. They said she must have left the door unlocked and he had gotten out, but she hadn't. The girls had been drinking wine, so the family said Susan must have been drunk and knocked over everything in the room. None of it was true. But how could she tell them what had really happened? They would think she was crazy. They searched everywhere for Lenny, but he was never seen again. What happened to Susan that night has been happening in various ways to millions of people around the world. What does all of it mean, and where is all of it going? The greatest transformation in human history has been taking place for at least the past 70 years. That transformation is psychological, sociological, political, spiritual, religious, scientific, and technological. And there is no division between these categories. All are being blended into a new worldwide religion. Evidence for this is found in a book entitled American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion, and Technology, published in 2019. The author is D.W. Pasulka. Dr. Pasulka is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where she holds the chair in the Department of Philosophy and Religion. Her book is a study of the nexus between religion, technology, and strange manifestations in the sky. Here is an interesting question. The amazing scientific and technological discoveries of the past 100 years, where do you think many of them came from? Does the word occult come to mind? It should. To write her book, Dr. Pasulka embarked on a long period of examination in an attempt to discover the reality and relationship, if one existed, between the untold thousands of UFO manifestations reported by experiencers around the world and the secret involvement, if any, of the government and the scientific community. A tall order with inherent dangers. Her book includes extensive reports about her meetings with certain very gifted and powerful men. She has hidden the identities of these individuals, and frankly, if it were not for her impeccable credentials, I would find what she reports extremely difficult to believe. She has taken a risk in telling the truth. One of the first people Dr. Pasulka introduces is a man that she calls Tyler. Tyler is extremely wealthy and owns a number of companies. His knowledge and skills are breathtaking. On the one hand, he is a wealthy aeronautical engineer who began his career at an early age in the Space Shuttle program and continues to work in aerospace. On the other, he is a brilliant biomedical entrepreneur who owns more than 40 patents and brings together venture capitalists, surgeons, and medical researchers in order to see his visions come to reality. But where do Tyler's brilliant ideas come from? He explained to Dr. Pasulka that years ago he had started working at a unique facility at the Space Center. In a top-secret and very mysterious room, he believed that he had been zapped with an energy that changed the frequencies of his body and his thoughts. It was in that room that he first came into contact with what he called an off-planet intelligence. Over the years, he states that it has been this intelligence that has helped him create his biotechnological wonders. One of those wonders is a material that is etched at the molecular level with information that a human bone reads as itself. This is called bone regenerative engineering and is incorporated into diseased tissue and bone to help the body recover from cancer and other diseases. One of his patients was a young mother who had bone cancer and was told that she would never walk again. Through application of his technology, she was completely healed. Tyler told Dr. Pasulka that he has a specific physical protocol for connecting with this off-planet intelligence. His description of the process reminded her of religious traditions that utilize yoga and meditation to connect with the sacred. Tyler believes that human DNA is both a receptor and a receiver that works at certain frequencies. In order to receive signals, human bodies and DNA need to be tuned. After working his protocol, Tyler is certain that the thoughts coming into his mind are not his own. This off-planet intelligence guides his life and work. Tyler is hardly alone in his views regarding the importance of communication with mysterious off-planet intelligence in order to accomplish scientific goals. Dr. Pasulka quotes Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the founder of the Soviet space program. This man was the discoverer of the equations that would eventually give scientists what they needed to create rockets to take people into space. Tsiolkovsky said this: "We are made as the ethereal beings existing beyond our dimensions of recognized reality. Higher beings are in communication with us, reading our thoughts and sending us messages through celestial symbols, which most of us do not even perceive, much less understand. A genius is one who comprehends and channels these messages from higher beings into technologies, products, and even art." Modern researchers who believe they are in contact with non-human intelligence call what they receive a download. These invisible beings have been downloading for a long time. The world has forgotten one of the most important men in the history of the U.S. space program. His name was Jack Parsons, and he was a genius who was one of the fathers of modern rocketry. He was a founder of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. But the people there would like to hide his name. Why? Because he was an occult adept, involved with British master occultist Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Parsons performed many occult rituals at his home in Pasadena in order to bring down and utilize power from invisible beings which he believed guided his research. He died in his 30s due to an explosion while performing an experiment in his home. As Dr. Pasulka continued her research, she met an amazing man who held an endowed chair of molecular biology and headed a laboratory at one of the top universities in the world. This individual, whom she called James, was very open about his UFO experiences. They began when he was a child of 5 or 6 years old. He remembers what he called little people appearing in his room and standing by his bed. During these visitations, he was fully awake but paralyzed. One of them happened when he was a young teen. While walking through a woods, a formation of lights passed over him at treetop level, and he felt frozen in a time warp. In his 30s, James woke from a sound sleep to find a tall, thin, translucent being at the end of his bed. Once again, he was paralyzed, and in his mind he heard a voice say, "Go to sleep," which he did. James believes that his contact with off-world beings has been vital to his great success. But there's something very odd and disturbing about James's attitude toward these off-world beings. Dr. Pasulka was there when he made an extremely personal presentation about UFO phenomena to a group of scientists. He told them that he knew people who had been bedeviled by contact with UFO entities. Bedeviled is an odd antique word, and he used it over and over. It means to be tormented by satanic forces. It appeared to Dr. Pasulka that James had taken on a life mission to develop a medicine or some kind of antidote to malicious UFO contacts. He was angered that such manifestations always took place under the total control of these beings instead of the victims who were bedeviled by their evil actions. Apparently his goal is to give humans the right and ability to say no to such vile assaults while maintaining his deal to get things he wants from the bedevilers. Does James sound like a modern Dr. Faust? Well, the young woman Susan would have given anything to have the ability to say no. She is an ultimate example of how dark the bedeviling can get. Less than 3 days after her terrifying experience at the farmhouse, Susan was invited by a young man to spend an evening with him on a date. They bought food and ate it in his car, looking out over the quiet beauty of a harbor. Lights from boats danced on the water. But the charm was lost on Susan. As she tried to eat, she felt exhausted and ill. Suddenly, far out over the harbor, a bright orange light appeared. It was higher than the boats, and it hung in the air. The young man thought it must be on the mast of a ship somewhere in the distance. But Susan knew it wasn't. She began to feel sick to her stomach. Though all the windows in the car were closed, suddenly there was electricity in the air. Then with tremendous speed, the light grew larger and nearer. It was a bright orange ball that looked like it was made of glass, and there was fire roaring inside. The thing was moving so fast that the young man was afraid it would hit the car. He tried to start the engine, but it was dead. Then the ball stopped and hovered over them. They were bathed in a fiery orange glow. The air popped with electricity. Then the thing shot off into the sky. The young man was amazed and thrilled. They had seen a UFO, he was sure of it. But for Susan, there was the same horror and panic of the farmhouse. She knew the thing had been searching for her. When it hovered, it had scanned her. Sitting in the car, she was helpless with dread. Well, things got ugly. Susan had an argument with the young man and found her own way home. As she sat crying on a bus, a tiny drop of blood ran from her nose. She arrived home to an empty house. She was living with her aunt, who was gone for the night, but who would return in the morning. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with family homes all around, nothing like the isolated farm. After showering, Susan grew even more ill, with diarrhea and cold sweats. Lying in bed, all she could see when she closed her eyes was that ball of fire. From that night on, Susan began having horrible, surreal nightmares that repeated over and over. It felt like evil beings were whispering to her, giving her dark visions. The entire following week, Susan was very ill. With a lot of love, her aunt took care of her. Finally, one night, Susan tried to tell her about all that had happened. Her aunt listened patiently about the farmhouse, the fireball, and the terrifying dreams. But she was a very practical, down-to-earth woman. Trying to comfort her niece, she said that it was all just nightmares and coincidences. But that very night, a far worse manifestation appeared. Susan awoke. She was lying in bed, paralyzed with a terrible pressure on her chest. With every ounce of effort, she shifted her eyes. Her bedroom door was open. Across the hall was her aunt's room. That door was open too. Her aunt had fallen asleep with her light on. Susan could see her on the bed with her cat asleep beside her. Suddenly, a tall, thin, hazy figure passed in the hallway. And then true evil descended. On top of her aunt's bed appeared a large, bulbous, transparent mass that was filled with bioluminescence, like a creature from the sea. The thing had stringy insect legs, and there was a sack on its back like a lung that opened and closed. Out of it spewed a mist of yellow gas. Susan tried to scream to warn her aunt, but she couldn't say a word. As she watched, thin tendrils pierced her aunt's nostrils, sending something deep into her. A moment later, her aunt awoke shrieking, and then all was darkness. The next thing Susan knew, it was morning. She stared across the hall. Her aunt wasn't in bed. She found her in the bathroom, retching. Afraid to tell her what she had seen, Susan asked what might have made her sick. Her aunt remembered nothing. Why was she ill? Well, there was a bug going around at work. Though she was ill herself, Susan did her best to take care of the woman. Not long after that, it was discovered that her aunt, who had been healthy and beautiful, had contracted a rapidly spreading cancer. Soon she died. As terrible as that was, much more was coming. One night, Susan was driving home from a visit with her parents, listening to the radio. It was a road that she had traveled 100 times. Everything was normal when suddenly her car screeched to a stop. Why had that happened? There were no other cars around. In the road in front of her was a beautiful fox. Over the radio came a clicking noise like one she had heard before. Instantly the car was flooded with a fierce red light. All she could see was red. And then she was gone, taken. Susan found herself struggling through a horrible forest. Above her, the night sky was blood red, and something was following her. Shivering in the cold, she struggled to escape whatever it was. Rushing out of the forest into tall grass, she saw someone stumbling along in front of her. It was a woman. Then there were more women. All were moving blindly like cattle being herded. She came upon a little girl of 5 or 6 who was terrified. Susan picked her up and carried her. The child clung to her, sobbing. Then, without warning, all of them shot straight up into the sky. Susan believes that they were taken into a huge spacecraft or alien base. Inside were a multitude of women, from children to the aged, moving blindly in long lines through a living hell. All were being processed by hideous so-called alien creatures who had total control over their minds and bodies. The young were being impregnated, while the rest were used for other evil purposes. What Susan witnessed was nothing less than a monstrous hybridization and feeding program being carried out on an industrial scale. The full description is so vivid and hideous that I cannot share it here. This was the harvesting of human females. Why would the evil beings responsible for all of this reveal it to Susan? Because they feed on human hopelessness and terror. There is much more in Davies' book, but hope is not a part of Susan's story. I recommend the book, but it's a tough read. What are we to make of all this? The easy answers for most people are that Susan is insane or G.L. Davies just fabricated the whole story. I don't believe either are to be true. Those who go through UFO abductions know they will be called crazy. That's why most remain silent. But Davies, who had interviewed many such people, didn't call her crazy and felt her story was important to tell. His book is short and not written like a novel. It's a first-person description of his meetings with Susan and what she told him. Though her account is more terrifying than any others that I have read, it is consistent with the abductions that so many have suffered. While the environments described by others are more pleasant, many times the beings they saw and the molestations they experienced were just as brutal as those described by Susan. Why do I believe Susan's story and the stories of so many other victims that I've read over the past 40 years? Because my wife Carol is an experiencer. One night early in our marriage, she awoke paralyzed. What followed was one of the most real and terrifying events of her life. Through the wall into our bedroom came 3 alien creatures, and they were enraged at her. Why, she didn't know. They threatened to kill her, and I, who was asleep beside her, would be blamed for it. They had entered our bedroom through our children's bedroom. How did Carol deal with these creatures of hell? She wasn't going to stay under their control. Their power over her was broken when she called on the name of Jesus Christ. In doing that, she brought the power of the King of Kings into that room. Those vile beings couldn't stand in his presence. Instantly, they vanished into thin air and have never returned. They were powerless over Carol because long before she had asked Jesus to forgive her sins and be her Savior. She is a daughter of the eternal King of Heaven. If you want to hear her full story, I tell it in episode 6 of this series entitled, Our Night Terrors Real. Carol tells it herself in episode 6 of our Hollywood Bible study series entitled Soul Assault. Since that experience many years ago, we have read dozens of accounts from people who came under similar satanic attack from dark beings that foolish individuals call extraterrestrial entities, and ended those attacks with Jesus' name. Any truly objective observer would agree that this is vital evidence about the reality of what's going on. There is such a tragedy in all of this, because these hellish attacks and abductions are unnecessary. Imagine that you are trapped in a vile dungeon, drowning in filth and vermin. The door is locked. I come outside that door and tell you that I have the key to open it, but it can only be opened from the inside. You have to take the key from me, insert it in the lock, and you will be free. But you absolutely refuse to believe that this is true. You refuse the key and remain in your living hell. That key is Jesus Christ, who came to set prisoners free. But when I say that, many people scoff, and tragically Susan would be one of them. She states clearly that she stopped believing in God a long time ago. Creating hopelessness and despair is a desire of the beings who have enslaved her. We are on the verge of a global nightmare. A vast new religion is growing, and the end result for humans will be a harvest of hell. This religion is based on an all-encompassing mythology created over many decades by Hollywood. Through Star Trek and Star Wars and countless other productions, we have been taught what to expect from a universe filled with ETs. A good example are the thousands who now claim to follow a Jedi religion. They were granted tax-exempt status by the IRS in 2015. The new UFO religion has an ever-growing priesthood that guides its expansion. This includes authority figures such as the scientist Dr. Stephen Greer, who promises to put us in direct contact with the techno-supernatural manifestations in our skies. This goes hand in hand with the great wave of psychedelic use taking place right now. According to a recent article in Vice.com entitled Silicon Valley's Latest Fascination is Exploring DMT Hyperspace, apparently many of the geniuses behind our ongoing artificial intelligence revolution are searching for deeper insight into beings in the DMT dimension. These look strikingly like the monsters in the UFO dimension. In this techno-religious environment, other scientists are warning that the new AIs, such as ChatGPT, will soon provide non-human priests to take millions of us into ever-increasing spiritual evolution. AI priests fit perfectly into the UFO religious superstructure. At this moment, a new AI cult is forming on the internet that's searching for members and donors as they wait for their artificially intelligent Messiah. Finally, there are the people who have been abducted and were given comforting messages for all of us. We're told that the ETs have our best interests at heart and only want to help save our planet. We should simply overlook the vast numbers that have been viciously abused and exploited during abductions. Standing in radical opposition to all of this is the Bible, which tells us that in this world there is an unseen war going on. It isn't just a war between nebulous good and evil. It's a war between a loving God and Satan, the father of lies, violence, and hate. The vast force of pure evil that Satan controls is quite able to build technological wonders in their dimension that they send into ours. The problem is that we have been drowned in enemy propaganda. We can't tell the difference between good and evil. The very concept of good has been demonized, and evil has been sweetened and glorified. Consequently, we don't understand that the greatest evil can present itself as angelic beauty and light, as loving ETs, or the Virgin Mary. The greatest evil can do good, giving gifts that actually help humanity, but the end result is destruction. Conversely, the greatest good often appears to be hard and heartbreaking, challenging every value that we hold, taking us out of ourselves and into a faith that is strong and filled with power. The end result of true good is love beyond anything we could imagine. Where is all of this going? Most people don't want to know, including millions of self-proclaimed Christians who are locked into the ultimate normalcy bias, immersed in health, wealth, and self, while bathing in the endorphins of electronic worship, with gold-painted wolves to guide them from the pulpit to politics. The Bible tells us the ultimate destination of this dark world. 2 Thessalonians 2:9-12 says this: "The coming of the lawless one, who is the ultimate world ruler of evil, is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned, who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." So how do we prepare? How do we keep from becoming puppets in the final dance of delusion? There's only one way. Meet the real Jesus, the one who loves you more than you could ever imagine, the one who gave his life and shed his blood to pay the price for your sin and set you free. But to meet him, you have to humble yourself. Like a little child, you have to pray and ask him to forgive you for all the evil things that you have done. Ask him to be Lord of your life. Stop thinking that you can run things yourself. A new life is waiting, my friend. I invite you to become a servant warrior of Jesus the King. Instead of being a slave to Satan, whom the Bible calls the prince of the power of the air, I invite you to stand in God's power against all evil, working to set other prisoners free. If we can be of help to you, contact us in the comments section. We will respond. As always, please do like and subscribe. Also, if you believe in what we're doing here at Thorn Crown Studios, we invite you to become one of our team members. We have a Patreon page and a Buy Me a Coffee page. Any help you can give would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, thank you so very much for watching.